Canada's new government has just unveiled its first federal budget. And let me tell you, it's not just a financial plan. It's a high-stakes, trillion-dollar bet on a completely new economic strategy for the country. So let's break this down and figure out what's really at stake here.
To really get a sense of how big a deal this is, you just have to listen to the words of the finance minister, François-Philippe Champagne. This isn't your typical run-of-the-mill economic update. He's framing this as a direct response to a world that's changing fast, a world where the very foundations of Canada's prosperity feel like they're under threat.
And that threat? Well, it's coming from a few places. You've got a sluggish economy right here at home, and then you've got this immense pressure from rising U.S. protectionism under the Trump administration. So this budget? It's the government's direct answer. It's their counterpunch to forces both inside and outside the country.
All right, so let's dig into this. First up, what's the actual problem the government is trying to fix with this massive new plan?
We're talking about a perfect storm here, really. GDP growth forecasts, they've been slashed. Then there's a big trade dispute that's just hammering key industries. Think aluminum, steel, cars, lumber. And to top it all off, the economy at home is just sluggish. So yeah, this isn't some far-off theoretical problem. This is an urgent, multi-front economic battle happening right now.
Okay, so with all that going on, the government's response is, well, it's a huge pivot. They're not just making a few small changes to the old system. Nope. They are placing a massive bet on a completely new way of doing things.
You can really see a fundamental change in thinking here. The last government, under Justin Trudeau, was heavily focused on social programs, public sector spending. But this new strategy under Prime Minister Mark Carney, it's all about the private sector. The whole focus has shifted from those pocketbook promises to corporate measures. They're betting that private investment, not public spending, is the engine that's going to restart the economy.
And the finance minister, he's not trying to downplay how bold this is. This quote really says it all. It's about taking an aggressive, forward-leaning stance. They basically see all these economic headwinds not as something to run from, but as winds they can actually harness to sail in a new direction.
Okay, so raising the sails sounds good, but what does that actually mean? What does it look like on paper? Let's get into the plan itself and see how they hope to pull this off.
All right, first things first, they're kicking this off with a pretty big injection of public money. We're talking nearly $90 billion in new spending over the next 5 years. So that's the government's initial investment to kind of get the ball rolling.
But here's the thing. The real heart of this plan isn't just that government spending. It's this new tool they're calling the Productivity Super-Deduction. Now, what is that? Well, it's basically a powerful tax incentive designed to do one single thing: get businesses to spend money. By letting companies immediately write off a way bigger chunk of the cost of new stuff, new equipment, new tech, new infrastructure, the government is hoping to kickstart a huge wave of private investment.
And the goal for that super deduction? It is absolutely massive. I mean, listen to this. The government isn't trying to spend $1 trillion themselves. No, their goal is to unleash $1 trillion in private investment. That's the headline number. That's the ultimate test of whether this whole gamble pays off.
So, what happens if this actually works? Well, if they pull it off, the payoff could be huge. They're projecting a big boost to average wages. We're talking about $3,000 a year. That could also mean an extra $15 billion in government revenue, money for things like healthcare, and, big picture, a much more competitive Canadian economy on the world stage. That's the dream scenario, right?
But, a huge pivot like this, it doesn't come for free. To pay for this new direction, some really tough choices had to be made. So let's look at the other side of the coin, the trade-offs.
So to make the numbers work, the budget lays out $56 billion in savings and cuts over the next 5 years. I mean, that's a serious amount of money designed to balance out all that new spending.
So where is that money coming from exactly? Well, the cuts are pretty specific, and they're all over the place. We're talking about cutting 16,000 public service jobs, a huge multi-billion-dollar cut to foreign aid. And then you have the end of some major environmental policies, like the consumer carbon tax and that 2 billion trees program. They're also scrapping the luxury tax on planes and boats and looking at changes to the oil and gas emissions cap.
So you've got the big spending, you've got the big cuts, and you've got this huge bet on the private sector. And all of that leads us to the final and maybe the most important piece of this puzzle: the massive uncertainty that's just hanging over this entire plan.
The first big question mark is captured perfectly in this quote from a Scotiabank economist. The government can offer all the incentives in the world, but the plan is only transformational if the private sector actually bites. The entire $1 trillion dream depends on companies and provinces deciding, yeah, let's invest.
And that right there is a huge if. And that's not even the only if. There's also the cold, hard political math. Just look at the numbers. The government is 3 seats short of a majority in the House of Commons. What that means is they can't pass this budget by themselves. They need backup.
And let's be crystal clear about what that means. If they can't get at least one opposition party on their side, or at least get them not to vote against it, this whole budget dies on the floor. And in Canada's system, when a budget fails, the government can fall. That could trigger a whole new election. I mean, the stakes just couldn't be any higher. So at the end of the day, here's what we've got. A really bold, really risky, and maybe even a transformational plan. But it's facing huge economic and political hurdles. The government has basically pushed all its chips to the center of the table, betting everything on private industry. And now the only question left is, will it pay off?